Mr. and Mrs. Smith had rescued their cat Stella just after they got married. They knew when they saw Stella that she was a very special cat. The first thing they noticed about her was that she was, to put it politely, quite gigantic. She was bright orange with stripes down her back, like a tiger. She had huge green eyes and massive ears with great tufts of white fur. When they went to the rescue centre, they were immediately besotted with this beautiful and majestic creature. Stella practically sauntered up to them, and she rubbed her legs against Mr. Smith, purring loudly. Mr. Smith always said they didn't choose Stella, she chose them. So, Stella came home with the Smith family. The Smiths loved Stella. They loved how she greeted them, with small chirps like a bird, and raced around if she saw a fly. They loved the way she sprinted around the living room and wolfed her food down, licking her lips with gusto. Stella adored her new home, especially outside in the garden. They didn't let her out right away, but when they did, she sped around the lawn and rushed up trees, though she never got stuck, however high she went. She was an excellent climber. Stella had a real personality. You knew when she was unhappy because she would sit there very still and look at you with those big eyes, and then she would blink very slowly and deliberately. During the day, she had multiple spots in the house where she liked to sleep. Sometimes she curled up into a tight ball on an armchair, pushing her head down under her body and snoring gently. If the radiator was on, that was her favourite spot, stretched all the way out alongside it, so as many parts of her body as possible came into contact with the warmth. She liked to get all cosy in the evenings, when she crept up to climb over Mr. Smith while he sat on the sofa, snoozing in front of the football. Mrs. Smith always laughed jokingly about how, when they'd met, Mr. Smith had insisted he wasn't a cat person in the slightest, but now he was sold on Stella and always ensured she had her favourite food, prawn and salmon. Nothing was too much for Stella. The feeling was mutual. Mr. Smith was undeniably her favourite. She adored him, and at night she clambered up on his lap and curled around him with her entire body. She had a set routine where she kneaded her paws onto his chest, then laid her long orange neck along his chin like a big ginger scarf. There, she began to snore in front of the fire, letting out gentle half-snores and long, happy purrs. So it was just Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Stella. Then the Smiths had 2 children. Katie was born a few years after they adopted Stella, and James came along 2 years later. Mr. and Mrs. Smith had been a little worried that Stella would be jealous of the children, but their fears came to nothing. Stella was intrigued by both babies and welcomed them into the family in her own way. When they were babies, she lay near their cots, guarding them, and when they were older, she smooshed her furry face close to theirs and cuddled them like a tiny lion. At night, she crept into their bedrooms and pushed under the duvet, where it was all warm and dark. There, she slept at the foot of their beds, keeping their feet warm on cold nights with her layers and layers of soft fur. She was a lovely cat with many little behaviours that the Smiths considered unusual, but they probably weren't. She had a few things that she liked most, chatting away at the birds and the children, and they imagined Stella was telling them stories. She also loved pottering outside looking for mice in the garden. One of her top activities was to follow Katie and James down the road on their way to school, hiding behind the bushes. "It's a sign she's a brilliant cat," said Katie. Stella, like most cats, craved enclosed spaces. If there was a cardboard box sitting around, she always jumped right into the centre of the box at top speed. She also sat in bowls, and even in the sink, getting damp all around her paws. Stella often went out in the day to see her friend Carol. Carol was a big old cat who didn't go outside. She strutted around looking out the windows, and Stella loved this. She went to the window and purred at Carol, pressing her head against the glass. The Smiths laughed that Stella had found a best friend, but Katie was concerned. "Maybe she's lonely," she said to her mum. "Maybe she wants another cat at home." "I don't think she's lonely," Mrs. Smith had said. "She's very happy. Stella has everything she needs." But Katie wasn't so sure. Then, one day, Katie came home from school with a plan. A girl at school had a cat that had just had kittens. They were looking for homes. Katie showed her mum a picture of them lying on the floor asleep, and then a video of them running around on the carpet. They were a mix of different colours. One was tortoiseshell, and two were black with white noses. Then there were three that were all a beautiful ginger colour, a little bit like Stella. But you could tell they wouldn't grow as big as Stella. They were all adorable, but there was one who sat apart from the rest, white with ginger paws, like little orange boots. As the video went on, the kitten with the orange boots jumped onto the kitchen counter and started grooming itself. It looked straight at the camera. The final kitten had big green eyes, just like Stella. "Please, can we get one, Mum?" Katie begged. "They're so cute." "I don't think we need another cat," said Mr. Smith. "Look at them though," Katie said again, knowing that her dad was a bit of a soft touch. She showed Mr. Smith the video, and he peered at the kittens. "Oh my goodness, they do look very, very sweet," Mr. Smith said with a small smile. Mrs. Smith came over to look and acknowledged that the kittens were adorable, but she was unsure. She explained to the children that there was a lot to consider, and that she wasn't sure whether Stella would appreciate adding a new kitten to the family. It was like Stella knew they were talking about her, and she stared at them with her big green eyes and let out a questioning little meow. James looked at the photos and watched the video many times. Then he joined in the begging. "Please," he said. "Please, can we get one? I'll look after it, I promise. I'll do all the feeding and play with it all the time. Please." Mr. and Mrs. Smith were torn. They had to admit the kittens looked very cute, but still, they were worried about Stella. "Which one would you want?" Mrs. Smith asked. If we were getting one, hypothetically, of course. She was well aware that even to ask the question, she'd given in, and they were getting a kitten. Well, we should get the white one, Katie said, and they all agreed. There was something about the little white kitten with the huge green eyes. It wasn't that the kitten looked like Stella, but there was something a little Stella about it, in the way it gazed up, unblinking in the video. So, the Smiths adopted a new kitten. They discovered the kitten was a boy before he arrived. Then they debated the name for a long time. Mr. Smith wanted something classically feline, like boots, to honor the kitten's little ginger paws. Mrs. Smith thought they should call him Archie because it went well with Stella. But then Katie piped up. What about Magnus? She asked. There's a famous chess player called Magnus. We learned about him at school. He does look very intelligent, doesn't he? Mr. Smith mused. So they decided to call him Magnus. They had to go out and buy all the new things Magnus would need. A little tray, a new food and water bowl. And Katie insisted on painting Magnus on all of them in orange paint. You won't be able to read it, James said scornfully. That doesn't matter, Katie said. I'll still be able to read it. They bought kitten food and a few different toys in bright colours. They got a cat tower for Magnus to climb and a brush for his fur. The final purchase was a beautifully soft blanket in light greens and blues, perfect for long naps. Everything was sorted, so one sunny morning in May, they went to pick up Magnus. They drove the short distance to Katie's friend's house, and the whole family was very excited about the prospect of the new kitten. Katie and James were chattering the entire way about him, and Mrs. Smith had to remind them that the kitten would almost certainly be apprehensive about his new home, and that they'd need to be friendly and gentle. They had expected Magnus to be a little unsure when they opened the cat box, but he buzzed around the house at top speed, practically climbing off the walls. They decided to keep him in a separate room for a few days, so Magnus was kept in the spare room, and Katie and James went and patted him regularly. Magnus had so much energy and felt so small compared to Stella. He ran around, sniffing everything and checking out his new water and food bowls. They'd bought him a scratching post too, and he ran into it full pelt, rubbing his body along the furry post and making tiny mewling sounds. Magnus had lots of things that fascinated him. He was still too young to go outside, but loved looking out the window and watching the birds. He liked feathers, especially chasing them. He liked shadows. He chased those too. Magnus had many different beds and cushions to lie on in the spare room, but he ignored them all, favouring the battered old cardboard box that had arrived containing his cat tree. He curled up and snoozed for much of the day, jumping out again to play with the children. He sniffed the beautiful soft blanket that Katie Smith had chosen for him, but he preferred snuggling up in one of Mr. Smith's old holey t-shirts, popping his head through the holes when he woke up and chirping happily. everyone agreed that Magnus was adorable. They could hardly imagine life before his arrival, even after a few days. Mr. Smith had read lots of advice regarding introducing Stella and Magnus. He read that it was best to start with scent swapping to get the cats used to one another. He also read that the cats could sniff each other through the door. So he pushed a towel with Magnus's scent under the door to make sure. But Stella was uncertain. They could tell because she pushed her ears forward. Her back was arched, and she hadn't even seen Magnus yet. They decided to give it a few days to let Stella become used to Magnus's scent. But Stella was unsure for a whole week. She watched as Mr. and Mrs. Smith and the children went into the spare bedroom to feed and play with the kitten, and she stared, her fur standing up all along her back. Mrs. Smith wasn't sure what to do, but she felt it had been long enough, and so she decided to introduce them to each other. They researched it because the Smiths always researched everything before they acted. They decided they would let Magnus out and observe. They could intervene if he got into trouble with Stella. It didn't go well. Stella hissed at Magnus and immediately went outside. Then Magnus tried to follow, but Mr. Smith jumped in and scooped him up. He was too young to go outside. They popped him back in the spare room and gave him a big cuddle. Katie and James were worried that night. They adored Magnus, but they didn't want Stella to be unhappy, and she wasn't herself at all. Staying outside and peering in through the cat flap at Magnus. "It all takes time," Mr. Smith said. "You just need to show a bit of patience." And the next day they tried again. They brought Stella into the kitchen and gave her some of her favourite snacks. Then they brought in Magnus too, and he ran at Stella, trying to play with her. The children laughed, and then Magnus raced up to them and tried to run up Katie's leg. Stella seemed on the fence, but then she let him run around her, and he batted at her nose playfully. She tolerated him, and then she went and dozed on her radiator, stretching out all across the top. She was lovely and warm. Magnus was exhausted from the excitement of meeting Stella properly, and he passed out on the sofa. The next day, they let Magnus out of the spare room. Mrs. Smith bought Magnus a new toy on a whim, a red ball you could pull around by a string. He was obsessed with it, and Katie played with him happily for hours. He darted under the sofa to follow it, retrieving it, then pulled the toy away from Katie and dropped it on Mr. Smith's lap like a puppy. "What a strange cat you are," Mr. Smith said, laughing. Stella watched from the sofa, then jumped up and started to chase the ball around at a breakneck speed as Katie pulled it. Magnus chased her, delighted that she wanted to play with him, and she seemed perfectly happy with the game. They ran around together for a while under the close supervision of the Smiths. "See," Mr. Smith said, "Stella just needed a little time to get used to everything." The time had come. Magnus was allowed out of the spare room all day, which gave him much more space to explore. The house had lots of different textures, sounds and smells. Magnus was delighted. He crept around each room, taking one at a time. He sniffed everything: furniture, bins, and especially shoes. He darted under the sofa and then out again in glee. He jumped on chairs and chased his shadow. They could see he was starting to work out his preferred spots in the house. He rubbed his face against the houseplants and clambered up on windowsills, looking out onto the world. He ran around frenetically, and then he passed out very quickly, like he couldn't stay awake a second longer. His tiny orange paws curled up under him. Now that he'd had a bit more exposure to Stella, he was decidedly obsessed with her, desperate to play fight. And then they had started to engage in some adorable tussles, where Magnus rolled around on the floor, shaking with joy. The children loved watching Magnus copy Stella. He had started chirping at the birds from the windowsill, just like her. His favourite thing to do when he saw her was to stalk her around the house and pounce at her back. Stella was always very gentle with him. They would bump heads softly, and Magnus would squeak with happiness. After they'd had Magnus for a few weeks, Mr. and Mrs. Smith agreed they couldn't imagine life without him. Stella took on the role of Magnus's mentor, trotting around and supervising him patiently, swiping him away if he was getting in trouble, or veering close to the edge of the kitchen counter where he could fall off. Eventually, they let Magnus outside. Usually Magnus ran everywhere, but he was cautious that first time out in the open. He put one paw on the grass very gently, like he wasn't quite sure, and then slowly moved across the lawn, getting used to the feeling of the grass on his belly. He approached the flower bed and looked up at the sunflowers and the roses. Tentatively, he pushed out his paw and gave the stalks a slight tap, and then he pottered to the other side of the garden. He didn't seem too sure. Magnus had been ever so confident in the house, but the garden was big, the sky blue above him, and it seemed to stretch forever. He was away from the comfort of the house, and he was uncertain. Luckily, Stella came outside, and Magnus perked up immediately. He followed her around the garden as she went to all her secret places, the hole under the fence that she liked to sneak through to go see Carol, and to the pile of dirt in the corner of the garden that Mr. Smith had been intending to move, but hadn't quite gotten round to. One evening, everyone was finishing up dinner. They just had a huge Sunday roast with crispy potatoes, roast beef, and Katie's favourite, cauliflower cheese, all golden on top. They were all feeling lovely and full, and they decided to go over to the sofa and watch a film. Mr. Smith decided to light a fire to keep them cosy. He knew the cats would love it. He always went through the same process when he lit a fire. First, he checked the chimney to ensure the flue was open. Then, he carefully removed the ash and debris. He made sure to give the area a good sweep. Slowly, he began to lay the base, taking crumpled newspaper and placing it on the hearth grate. He added dry sticks and split wood on top of the newspaper. To finish, he put down his larger logs. Satisfied with his work, he took the matches and lit the newspaper. He watched as the flames began to catch, and it was warming and snug as they spread along the fire base, emitting a soft glow. He added logs gradually, one at a time, enjoying building up his fire. The rest of the family watched too. After about half an hour, the fire was burning well. The flames had settled into a deep orange around the wood. The smell of the fire was in the room, a mixture of something sweet and caramelly, and that comforting scent of smoky wood. There was a slight crackle occasionally that was ever so soothing. It lulled James into a delicious snooze. Mr. Smith was satisfied with his fire, and he watched it sleepily. Mrs. Smith looked like she was about to fall asleep too. Her eyes were heavy, and her book slid down onto her tummy. Katie lay on the floor in a heap of cushions, the TV on low. Then Katie looked over to the armchair. It was an old one, patterned with faded pink and white stripes, strategically placed near the fire. None of the Smiths ever sat on the armchair. From the day Stella had arrived, she had declared it hers. That night, Katie looked over and smiled at the heart-warming sight. Stella had climbed up and formed a ball, her body as close to the fire as possible. To the back of the armchair, Magnus was there too, curled under her tummy. Their tails were wrapped around each other, and all you could hear was the purrs. They looked so cozy, like they could lie there forever, with the warmth around them. Katie looked into the fire, and she took a deep breath. To see the cats, she imagined how satisfied they must feel, and she felt her shoulders loosen and her jaw unclench. Outside there was gentle rain, and it pattered softly. Pitter-patter, pitter-patter. Inside they were safe and snug, and the light was warm and golden from the fire. Katie breathed in, imagining the warmth coming into her chest, and she imagined how warm Stella and Magnus were. She found the heat spread through her arms and back, and then into her legs and feet. She noticed the way the firelight moved on the walls. Everything in the room seemed to glow like it was being lit from within. And she listened to the cat's purrs become louder. She took a slow breath and gently exhaled as she let her body settle into nothing but comfort. Her eyelids began to soften. Her jaw unclenched, and every part of her almost felt like liquid. She felt rested and content, just like a cat before a fire. We'll leave our story there for tonight. I'm going to give Maisie and Ted a bit more attention. Sleep well, and sweet dreams.